Hello, this is Dr. Cooper, and this is the second part of Lecture 1, Death Itself. And the title of this section is Death as a Terrifying Force. So, welcome back to my office, and in this section of the lecture, we are going to look at scarier personifications of death that developed in Europe and intensified after the pandemic of plague known as the Black Death in the 14th century. Europe wasn't the only place with scary personifications of death, though, as we will see when we look at the Maori people of New Zealand. In the Celtic mythology of Ireland, death figures are often less personified as a single deity and are thought of more as harbingers of death or supernatural forces. The banshee is a female spirit whose mournful wail foretells the death of a family member. The banshee is a folkloric figure out of oral tradition, and there are no early images of a banshee, at least that have been identified as such by scholars. So the image I've used here is from an 1825 book of folklore by Thomas Crofton Crockers called Fairy Legends and Traditions of South of Ireland. Now, the earliest evidence for the banshee tradition suggests very old roots indeed, back to the 8th century CE, and in the Irish practice of professional female mourners who would lament at funerals. This tradition evolved eventually into the figure of the banshee as a supernatural spirit, with the first written records appearing in the 12th century. We get the English word keening from the Irish word for this kind of professional mourning, quintiori, but the English word indicates an inarticulate, high-pitched moaning, but the Irish tradition of professional female mourners signified so much more. It was a highly articulate tradition of women's oral poetry. The lamenting woman led her community in a public display of grief. She was barefoot and dishevelled, acting out the disorder brought about by the death. Far from inarticulate wailing, her utterances rhymed and were rhythmic and expressed praise for the dead person, as well as spilling invective towards his enemies. Her lament proceeded through a slew of emotions, the necessary parts of the grieving process that today we would label denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. I've left a little 2-minute video for you of someone singing this traditional Irish professional female mourner's role in the extra effort section at the end if you're interested. It is from this real tradition then of the lamenting women that the supernatural female figure of the banshee emerges. Now, the term banshee comes from the Irish Biansi, which translates as woman of the fairy mound. When the banshee appears or is heard wailing or shrieking, it is said to herald the death of a family member by this wailing and shrieking. Now, families would often interpret her wail as a sign to prepare for a loss. In some traditions, the banshee is seen as a guardian spirit, particularly for the noble old Irish families, and her presence is a sign of respect for those ancient lineages. Banshees in older Irish folklore traditions are varyingly described, but kind of standard is a woman wearing a white or grey gown and possessing an otherworldly beauty. Some legends depict them as old women, while others describe them as young maidens. Some are very tall and some are very short, sometimes only 1 foot tall. They are often described as having long, unbound hair, which they comb, and this may hark back to the dishevelled appearance of the mourning Chiantori, with their hair unbound and going about dishevelled as part of their professional mourning duties. Once the banshee entered modern media depictions, she became much more of a schlocky horror figure, as we can see here from this advertisement for a 6-part Banshee book series and the Banshee movie. The Banshee on the upper right is from the video game Raid, and this at least seems to be giving a bit of a nod to tradition. Those fairy mounds, those ban in the name Banshee, are real places. Fairy mounds are actually archaeological remains of ancient ring forts, hill forts, and other circular defense structures, including stone circles, that date back to the Bronze Age and early Christian periods. What you're looking at here is the Hill of Tara in County Meath, which was once the seat of the High Kings of Ireland. Legends abound about this place, with some believing it is the entrance to the fairy kingdom, where the fairies would lure their human hostages. Irish fairies, by the way, are pretty scary supernatural beings. They're not cute at all. So in Scandinavia, this is the Norse goddess Hel that personifies death and presides over a dreary underworld realm of the same name. But she really wasn't envisioned by the Norse as anything like the Marvel villain, so let's get rid of all those ideas of form-fitting jumpsuits and bizarre hats. This is Hel in the lower right corner, as she is pictured in an 18th century manuscript illustration of the Prose Edda. Now, the Prose Edda was written around 1220 CE in Iceland as a kind of textbook or reference book to Norse mythology. In the Prose Edda, Hel is described as having a dual appearance. One half of her body is flesh-coloured, while the other half is half blue or half black, and she has a downcast and gloomy look. Hel's contrasting appearance symbolizes the dual nature of her realm. Her blue-black lifeless side represents the coldness of death, but the other human-colored side has the color and vigor of life. This represents a duality that we see in many personifications of death, or indeed in death gods and goddesses, a duality that reflects the cyclical nature of life and death. So Hel is appointed by Odin to rule the underworld realm, also called Hel. While Odin receives the souls of the dead who die in battle at Valhalla, Hel receives those who die of sickness or old age, and the fate of the souls in her realm depends on their actions in life. Some face grim fates and others rest peacefully. So in this manuscript illustration, Hel is obviously pictured with her blue side facing us. She's the figure at the bottom right here. At her feet are Hel's dish called hunger and her knife called famine. These are the kinds of death, these inglorious deaths that leads people to Hel rather than Valhalla. So what we're seeing here is an attempted rescue of Odin's son Balder from Hel. The god Hermother set off on Odin's 8-legged horse Sleipnir and tried to ransom Balder, telling Hel of the love of all the people for Balder. Hel says the love of the people for Balder has to be tested, stating that if all things in the world, alive and dead, weep for him, then he'll be allowed to return. But if anyone speaks against him or refuses to cry, then he must remain with Hel. One female giant refuses to weep for the dead Balder, responding in a verse, "Let Hel hold what she has." And we can see faint similarities to the story of Gilgamesh's journey to the realm of the dead here, while he is grieving for his friend Enkidu, that we looked at in the last section. And I should just point out that Hel in this situation, in the Scandinavian situation, is only spelt with one L, H-E-L, not two L's. The two Northern European personifications of death we have just looked at are more scary, more macabre than the gentle guides of the ancient Mediterranean world. But next we'll get to perhaps the most iconic personification of death in Western culture, the Grim Reaper. So what you're looking at here is one of the earliest representations of this personification in Europe, a manuscript illumination by the French miniaturist Jean Fouquet, painted in around 1460, in which this figure of the Grim Reaper has most of his kit already: a tattered robe, a skeletal body, and of course that huge scythe. A scythe, by the way, was an agricultural tool that a farmer swung back and forth to cut down a huge amount of wheat stalks in one pass. In a similar manner, this Reaper of Souls cuts down a huge number of human souls in one fell swoop. Personifications of death like this became more frequent in European art after the Black Death, a great pandemic of the plague that swept across Asia, Europe, and parts of Africa in the 14th century. In Europe, over 1/3 of the people died, and this left a morbid and macabre fascination with death in European art. We will be looking at the Black Death in detail later on in the course. And as we will see, one of the things about the plague that provoked so much fear was that it kept coming back and back again well into the 17th century. What you've been looking at here is a painting by the Dutch Renaissance artist Pieter Bruegel called The Triumph of Death. And as you can see, he doesn't just imagine a solitary reaper of souls, but a whole army of them. One is even mounted on horseback. The widespread and indiscriminate nature of the plague led to a profound shift in how death was perceived. It was no longer a gentle transition, but a terrifying and impartial force. The Danse Macabre, the Dance of Death, was a popular artistic allegory showing skeletons leading people of all social classes to their graves, emphasizing that death comes for everyone, regardless of their status. The scythe is a powerful symbol, linking death to the harvest or the reaping of souls. And what you're looking at here is a woodcut printing. So someone has carved a block of wood to leave parts that were raised or higher than the underlying wood, and then black ink is applied and the wooden block is pressed onto paper, and only those raised parts leave their mark. So obviously lots of these woodcut prints could be made cheaply compared, say, to that beautiful miniature of Jean Fouquet in the manuscript, or Bruegel's intensely packed painting. They were not out of reach of people who were not so wealthy. They're, people who were middlingly wealthy, richer peasants could buy these. And so you could see the appeal of the notion that death comes for us all and leads us on a merry dance macabre, regardless of whether we are prince or pauper. And as I said, it wasn't just Europeans who had some grim ideas connected with the personification of death. The Maori, the indigenous inhabitants of New Zealand, have a very scary goddess of death called Haine Nui Te Po. Trigger warning, there are elements of incest and rape in this story. So Haine Nui Te Po was originally the goddess of dawn, and at that time her name was Haine Te Tama. Without knowing it, without knowing their connection to each other, her father, Tane Muhata, pursued and then married his own daughter, Haine Te Tama. And when she discovered that her new husband was in fact her father, the betrayal and the trauma compelled her to leave the world of the living and descend into the underworld. And there she became Haine Nui Te Po, which translates as the Great Woman of the Night. And she took on the role of the guardian and mother of spirits, and she now waits there to pull human souls down to her realm. Now, you may have been sat here wondering what is going on in this carving of Haine Nui Te Po, which was carved by the Maori artist Tene Wetere in a meeting house which opened in 1900. Well, let me explain. The great demigod hero Maui much like Gilgamesh and Hermethor, who we've already met, decided to enter the realm of the dead and defeat Haine Nui Tipo so he could achieve immortality. Now, Maui is tricked by his father into thinking he has a chance if he enters the goddess through her vagina. And while Haine Nui Tipo is asleep, Maui undresses and turns himself into a lizard in order to enter the goddess. The birds who are nearby burst out in laughter, alerting Haine Nui Tipo, and Haine Nui Tipo reacted to being molested by crushing him with the obsidian teeth in her vagina. Now, obsidian is a very, very incredibly sharp black volcanic glass. So Maui was the first person who suffered mortality, and this has meant the finality of humanity in mortality from this point on. Now, the sort of obnoxious elements of incest and rape are acknowledged in this story by the Maori, and it's used as an educational tool for that reason. Now, this is not the only story of teeth in a vagina in the world. There's actually quite a lot of them, so much so that they have a name, vagina dentata, which pretty means vagina teeth. And there are stories from southeastern Russia, Japan, in Hinduism, as well as in indigenous peoples of North and South America. Okay, so let's leave that there with with this Maori story, which is, I think, the scariest depiction of personification of death. And we'll pick this up next time with some even more complex depictions of death. I thank you for your attention.